They called it the Celestial Concord, a treaty to end the bloodshed. 47 alien species, each with fleets, colonies, and political claws, signed it with ink made from centuries of slaughter. And in the center of it all sat Earth, the last species invited to the table. We were the youngest, the most reckless, the most feared. It wasn't always like that. For a while, the galaxy treated us like primitives playing with stolen tech. They thought we'd be easy to sway with promises of trade and planetary seats. But every time they underestimated us, we came back louder, angrier, and more prepared to ruin someone's day. Now, the Galactic Council offered peace. Real peace, they said. A historic moment to lay down weapons and unify. The treaty signing would take place in orbit over Velixar. A lush, ancient world, they said, was sacred ground for diplomacy. Bullshit. Commander Grady Holt didn't buy it for a second. He'd seen the footage that never made it to the public. Ships torn apart without warning. Mining colonies erased from maps. Accidents that always seemed to happen when humanity made progress. They feared us, not because we were more powerful, but because we refused to kneel. So when the message came through, Holt didn't trust the Council's sweet talk. He didn't believe in peace born from panic, and he sure as hell wasn't going to walk into alien territory with open arms. He came armed. The UNS Blackthorn dropped out of warp with 5 dreadnoughts on its flanks, not escorts, wolves watching the woods. Holt stepped onto the Velixar delegation platform with a sidearm strapped visibly to his hip. The other captains did the same. The aliens didn't like that. A serpentine diplomat from the Corex hissed as Holt passed. "This is a peace summit, human. Leave your war tools at the door." Holt didn't even break stride. "You invited us into your house. We just remembered what happened the last time." They knew exactly what he meant. 10 years ago, during another so-called peace meeting, 3 human diplomats were vaporized mid-speech. The footage was wiped, the incident denied. No alien was punished, but humans remember, especially the ones who bury the dead. Inside the dome, under glowing starlight and high arches carved by species older than Earth's continents, Holt stood before the grand chamber. At his side, Captain Mira Dre, cold-eyed and merciless. Colonel Rigg, a walking slab of war muscle. And Rear Admiral Chen, no, scratch that, Rear Admiral Grant. We don't do Chen here. Each of them had one job, not to sign anything until the scanners confirmed the terms were clean, the air wasn't poisoned, and no sudden weapons came online. But the trap was already set. Right as the Council High Voice began his speech, a signal went out. Holt noticed it only because of a twitch in his neural comm, something trying to hijack their system frequencies. The lines of text were masked as ceremonial updates, diplomatic static. But Holt had seen code like this before. It wasn't a message. It was a kill switch. "Abort," Holt whispered into his mic. "Phase 3, full lock and load." Around him, the alien delegates were smiling. Hands folded, fake grins stretched tight over teeth, mandibles or whatever passed for diplomacy in their species. Then the lights cut out. 1 second of silence, long enough to make a man feel the edge of death. And then the shooting started. It came from the rafters first, automated plasma bolts raining down on where the humans stood. But Holt and his team had already dived to cover. Rear Admiral Grant pulled twin pistols from his jacket and fired back at the nearest drone. Captain Dre wasn't even surprised. She activated her exo-rig in one motion, lifting a shield generator from her back like she'd been waiting for this moment for years. "This isn't peace," she muttered, teeth clenched. "No," Holt said, cold and calm. "This is justice in disguise, and we brought the only answer they understand." He slammed his palm into a hidden console built into the delegation platform. From orbit, the UNS Blackthorn received the code. A second later, Earth's contingency plan roared to life. 6 orbital kinetic rods, each the size of a submarine, began their descent. Peace was dead, but humanity was just getting started. Smoke coiled through the vaulted ceilings like a living thing, thick and hot, carrying the stench of scorched alloy and roasted flesh. Alien screams echoed through the chamber, a mix of confusion, betrayal, and fear. Not fear of death itself. Fear of humans. The moment the first plasma bolt had fired, the room had transformed. No longer a hall of diplomacy. Now it was a kill box. And humanity had seen it coming. Commander Holt knelt beside the cracked dais, shielding himself from another volley of incoming fire. He didn't flinch, didn't shout, just calmly keyed in coordinates to his HUD and growled into comms. Target uplink confirmed. 5 seconds to impact. Watch for debris. From the sky above, the UNS Blackthorn's payload began to fall. They called them Thors, because when they hit, even gods would bleed. Kinetic rods, solid tungsten, no warhead, no explosive, just mass, speed, and the rage of an entire species fed up with lies. Captain Mira Dre crouched beside him, dragging an injured security tech behind a half-melted column. Her voice was hoarse. "We should have sent 10 rods." Holt shook his head. 10 would have been mercy. This is a message. He looked up through the chaos as a drone clipped his shoulder with a bolt of plasma. The pain flared through his bicep, but he bit down hard and kept firing. No cry, no weakness. Humanity didn't bleed in front of its enemies, not without returning the favor tenfold. Suddenly the entire chamber shook. Not from weapons, not from any fleet. The first rod hit. It didn't strike the diplomatic dome itself. Not yet. Holt had chosen its coordinates carefully. It landed on Velixar's military garrison 5 kilometers south, where the real strike teams were waiting to storm the summit once humanity was disarmed. Or so they thought. The ground trembled like it had a heartbeat. A roar swept over them, deafening and low, and seconds later a column of dirt, fire, and obliterated metal rose into the sky like a demonic tree. The garrison was gone. Just gone. The shockwave cracked the summit walls. Panels ripped from their frames. Columns groaned, snapping under the pressure. Alien guards staggered, losing focus. That was enough. Rear Admiral Grant emerged from the left flank with 2 squads of armored Marines, their rifles barking like angry gods. No war cries, no shouts, just clean, brutal precision. They fired into the upper balconies first, clearing the automated turrets and snipers hiding in carved architecture. Then they turned on anything that wasn't wearing a human exo-rig. "Confirmed breach," Grant said through the squad channel. "Chamber secured in 90 seconds. Colonel Rigg was already on the move. He moved like a tank, his armor custom-built for CQB, close quarters brutality. He carried a 12-gauge kinetic shotgun that pulped 2 slithering Curex guards before they even got a warning out. The third tried to crawl away with half its spine exposed. Rigg put a boot through its skull. "Where's the Council High Voice?" he barked. "I want that freak alive." A brief scan painted a blinking icon above the back corridor. Holt grinned. "Running. Of course." The bastard had vanished the second things got hot. Probably thought he'd escape in some stealth skimmer. Probably had an evacuation tunnel built into the goddamn diplomatic floor. "Dre, flank him! Rigg, you're with me!" Holt reloaded his pulse rifle and took off after the Council's head diplomat. His boots smashed over shards of marble and crushed alien artifacts worth more than nations. He didn't care. He wasn't here for culture. He was here for revenge. Down the hallway, lights flickered. Blood smeared the walls. One of the alien guards, some bird-faced bureaucrat species, was slumped against a door, a gaping hole in its chest. Holt kicked the body aside and hit the panel. Locked. Didn't matter. He stepped back and fired a single shot from his underslung breacher. The door exploded inward with a scream of bending metal and sparks. Inside, chaos. The high voice, a withered, four-limbed gray thing draped in ceremonial robes, stood at the far end, his eyes wide, chest heaving, a stolen alien sidearm shaking in his claws. "You brought war to a sacred table," the creature shrieked. "You've doomed everything." Holt raised his weapon but didn't fire. Not yet. "You signed our death warrants with a smile. What did you think we'd bring? Flowers?" "You broke the accord." "There never was an accord. There was just a cage. We just brought bolt cutters." Behind him, Dre entered, rifle raised. Her voice was flat. "We got company incoming. Full strike team from orbit. Stealth pods. They're still trying." Of course they were. Holt stared down the alien, hatred glowing in his voice. "You planned this ambush thinking we'd play nice. You counted on the stupid, naive part of humanity. You forgot we're also the species that burned its own atmosphere just to win a war." He stepped forward and pulled the alien's weapon from his clawed grip. "We don't forgive, we don't forget, and we don't kneel." Then he turned to Dre. "Is the stream active?" She nodded. "Live across every system. They're watching." "Good." Holt looked into the camera lens installed above the chamber door. It was broadcasting to every major world, every colony, every species that thought humanity could be put back in its box. "Let this be known," he said, his voice iron. "Earth did not come here for peace. We came to survive. You tried to kill us. You failed." He raised his sidearm, and without flinching put a bullet through the high voice's chest. The alien crumpled, robes soaking in whatever passed for blood in his species. A beat of silence. And then Holt turned back to Dre. "Launch the final 2 Thors, on the capital shipyards." "Confirmed." She tapped her wrist. "Rod 3 and 4 locked. Impact in 90 seconds. The UNS Blackthorn, miles above, was already shifting. Earth's last resort command ship. It didn't bristle with guns. It was the gun. A floating sentence of death with one purpose: to remind the galaxy that humanity didn't play by the same rules. Inside, orbital rods dropped into freefall, not aimed at soldiers, not at fleets, at infrastructure, at the root. One struck the Velixar capital shipyard, leveling a construction facility that had been preparing an experimental fleet to patrol peacefully along Earth's trade routes. The second hit a resource depot used by the Tolkari, a species that had been secretly funding raids on human outposts while preaching neutrality. Both vanished in fire and gravity. Back inside the summit dome, Holt sat on the fractured steps of the chamber's throne. Breathing heavily, arm burning, but eyes still sharp. He knew what was coming. Now the galaxy would come for them. No more subtle sabotage. No more puppet factions. This was war, open and wild. But for the first time, it would be fought on Earth's terms. And Holt didn't mind that one bit. He opened a comms line to Fleet Command back home. "Treaties burned. Enemy plans exposed. We neutralized their command chain." A pause. "Tell Earth it begins now." They called it First Blood on Earth's channels. The footage of Commander Holt executing the Council High voice mid-broadcast rippled across the galaxy like a virus. Every backroom diplomat, every spineless planetary governor, every alien cartel boss who once spoke the language of peace with a knife in hand. Now they saw Earth for what it had truly become. A problem they could no longer manipulate, a beast they couldn't muzzle, a fire that wouldn't go out just because the galaxy demanded it. The Council's orbiting comms stations went dark 6 hours later. A direct EMP strike from UNS covert frigates hidden behind Velixar's secondary moon fried their entire diplomatic relay grid. Every alien message demanding surrender, every threat, every desperate attempt to talk this out was silence. And in that silence, Earth moved. Commander Holt didn't wait for orders. Earth Command didn't need to send them. They understood each other now. The leash had snapped. No more red tape. No more negotiations. No more begging for a seat at a table that was always rigged. Holt stood aboard the UNS Blackthorn's bridge, staring out at the Velixar skyline as it burned. Ash curled into the clouds. Alien ships limped through the atmosphere, trying to evacuate delegates that would never get the chance to betray another soul. Humanity wasn't fighting a war anymore. It was erasing a mistake. Admiral Thorne, his face worn and hardened like a cracked hull, appeared in the central display. "We've confirmed orbital lockdown. Velixar is isolated. You've got 5 hours before the next wave comes knocking." Holt nodded. "Make it 3. We're staying to leave a memory." Thorne's mouth curled just slightly. Not a smile, just approval. He disconnected, and Holt turned to the room. "Dre, inventory on munitions." "Down 30%, she said, her voice clipped and calm. "But we've still got enough to vaporize a city. Rig has ground teams sweeping the tunnels. Rear Admiral Grant took the eastern flank and already repelled 2 extraction squads." "Any civilians?" Dre shrugged. "Depends on your definition. Everyone here stood by while the Council plotted our death. If they had a soul, they sold it long ago." "Good." Holt stared into the smoke. "Then we won't waste a sermon." Down below, Colonel Rigg moved through the ruins like a machine built for vengeance. His men swept room after room in the underground bunkers, not for survivors, for evidence. And they found it. The tunnels beneath the diplomatic dome weren't just escape routes. They were weapon caches, holding bays, each one labeled under fake peacekeeping programs. Some contained modified gene weapons, viruses tailored to human biology. Others held tactical nanobot shells, meant to target neural implants. One chamber was worse. It was cold, lined with glass pods. Inside, bodies, human, some partially dissected, some still breathing, barely. Test subjects, prisoners taken from accident sites, the very people Earth had been told were missing due to mining failures or spatial anomalies. Rigg stood there for a long time, jaw tight, fingers flexing on his rifle. One of the surviving prisoners, an older man, skin pale and scarred, voice hoarse, looked up from the floor. "You came," he croaked. Rigg didn't respond, just knelt and handed the man a sidearm. The prisoner blinked, trembling. I don't know how to use this." Rigg leaned in, pointed at the ones who did this, and squeeze. Then he stood and turned to his comm. "Commander Holt, we've got confirmation. Experiments, biologicals, missing civilians. You were right. It was never about peace. This was a slow execution." Holt didn't say "I told you so." He didn't need to. He just replied, voice flat. "Record everything. Upload it to every unsecured channel. I want the galaxy to see what peace looks like from their end." Dre tapped in the stream. Across hundreds of thousands of systems, the truth began to pour out. Velixar's sacred tunnels, alien scientists dissecting humans alive, council officials laughing as subjects screamed. The peace treaty hadn't been a trap. It had been the final curtain call. Wipe out the humans while they're distracted by diplomacy. End their expansion. Reclaim the stars before Earth grew teeth too sharp to ignore. But Earth had brought fangs. And now the rest of the galaxy was panicking. Aboard a council cruiser in the Rim sector, the Zalari regent watched the footage with shaking claws. His advisors screamed for emergency mobilization, for retaliation, for extermination. But the regent knew better. This was not an outburst, he muttered. No, Regent, this was an execution. Somewhere deep in council space, another species, the Brith Collective, immediately began cutting off diplomatic ties with all known council member worlds. Their ambassador broadcast a simple message. We warned you. You poked a bear, and now the bear is skinning your gods. Others began to follow. Factions who had remained neutral, civilizations who had whispered doubts behind closed doors. Now they were seeing the truth. And Earth had made it undeniable. Back on Velixar, Holt prepared the final phase. Full evacuation, he ordered. No stragglers. Anyone left behind knew what they were part of. Dre raised an eyebrow. And the dome? Holt's eyes didn't blink. Burn it. An hour later, the Blackthorn's final orbital strike fell. It didn't use kinetic rods. It used atmospheric disruptors, plasma bursts that cracked the air and turned entire structures into molten glass. The dome, the chamber, the tunnels, all of it. Gone. Just a scorched crater where lies used to live. And then they left. Fleet Command recalled Holt and his crew. The Blackthorn vanished into warp space, flanked by the surviving dreadnoughts, leaving nothing but ashes behind. But the war had only just begun. A week later, the retaliation came. 3 council fleets, stripped from nearby sectors, launched a direct assault on Earth's closest colonies, Keras Station and Lunar Relay 9. They thought the humans would panic, that Earth would recall its forces to defend its borders. They were wrong again, because Earth wasn't defending anymore. It was hunting. The UNS Red Vulture, a deep space missile cruiser fitted with stealth tech and reverse-engineered alien jamming systems, intercepted the Council's fleet before it even reached Keras. Under Captain Shaw, it didn't engage in a frontal fight. No honor, no broadcast. It dismantled the enemy fleet from the inside, hijacked their communication grid, blew up fuel lines mid-formation, hacked into their navigation, and redirected 3 warships straight into a sun's gravity well. When the Council finally realized what was happening, half their fleet was already gone. The rest fled. They limped back to Council space with nothing but horror stories and broken armor. And Earth? It didn't just cheer. It started building more Red Vultures. Inside the black halls of Earth Command, leaders didn't celebrate. They strategized. They understood now that the war had no rules, no front lines, no mercy. It was a cleansing. One species had drawn the line, and the rest would have to decide which side of history they'd die on. Commander Holt watched it unfold from orbit above Earth, his ship resting in dry dock for resupply. The stars outside didn't look peaceful anymore. They looked like targets. Dre joined him at the viewing deck, arms crossed. Intel says 3 more Council species are gearing up, mobilizing in the Deltar sectors. Holt nodded. Let them. The fire's already lit. They'll just burn with the rest. She looked at him, not with concern, but with respect. You planning on stopping anytime soon? He shook his head slowly. Number not until the stars remember who we are. Not until every treaty burned. The death lists started appearing 3 days after Velixar burned. Encrypted broadcasts, No sender ID, no traceable origin, just names. Aliens, humans, hybrids. Every single one of them had a part in the treaty. Some were executioners, others were silent benefactors, council members, CEOS weapons scientists, collaborators, governors who closed their eyes while human colonies were erased and called it diplomacy. Earth stopped pretending to play politics. Now it played God. Every name on those lists had 48 hours, and they all knew what came next. Across the stars, lights started going out. The Bracken Minister of Biowarfare, one of the architects behind the gene virus designed to target human respiratory systems, was found in orbit above Zolakar 6, flayed open in his own escape pod. No trace of forced entry, no escape logs, just a single sentence burned into the glass of the pod window. We remember. 3 hours later, a council spy lord based in the merchant moon of Valtryk was liquefied mid-broadcast. His neural uplink had been hijacked during a transmission, and the feedback loop melted his brain inside his skull. The message that flashed across the screen just before his eyes bled out was even simpler. So do we. They tried to call Earth terrorists, fanatics, rogue elements. But they knew the truth. It wasn't a rogue squad. It wasn't a handful of madmen. It was the system now. A coordinated state-sanctioned operation. A global consensus, signed in blood and steel. Anyone who conspired in humanity's slow genocide would pay. No matter how long it took, no matter how far they ran. Commander Holt was back in deep space, standing in the war room aboard the UNS Blackthorn. It was no longer just a battleship. It had become Earth's mobile execution chamber. Around him, Dre, Rigg, and Grant stared at the newest dossier. A target on Eltrix Prime. An Axian ambassador who'd funneled tech and tactical data to the Council fleet under the guise of peace programs. Disguised his shipments under humanitarian aid, Dre muttered, shaking her head. Fed intel on our Mars expansion to the Council. That data was used in the Helion massacre. Rigg spat. I was at Helion. That bastard's getting his teeth handed to him, even if I gotta pull them out one by one. Holt looked over the profile. He lives inside a civilian fortress, surrounded by an unarmed species, protected by neutrality laws. Grant folded his arms. So? Holt nodded slowly. So we don't go loud. We go surgical. The UNS Whisper, Earth's newest stealth corvette, entered Eltrix Prime orbit under the call sign of a medical aid vessel. No weapons showed on scans, no threat ID, just a floating hospital. Another quiet miracle from Earth's benevolent outreach programs. No one questioned it. They wanted to believe humanity had calmed down, that maybe the outbursts were over, that maybe the fire was dying. But inside the Whisper, Commander Holt moved like a shadow. He was dressed in civilian gear. No armor, no insignia. Just a tired man with a face that could disappear in a crowd. He didn't need a team. This one was personal. The Axian ambassador, named Treval, lived in a glass spire above a neutral zone compound. The building was a monstrosity of false peace. Hanging gardens, meditation pools. He even had human servants, rescued slaves, he claimed, who were paid in coin and sanctuary. Holt entered through the public access channel. No alarms, no questions. The doorman, an old cybernetically enhanced reptilian, nodded politely. Peace be upon your journey, traveler, he rasped. Holt didn't reply. He rode the lift to the top floor. Security scanned him, found nothing threatening. Of course it did. Holt had removed the metal from his body years ago. Neural wetware, ceramic-encased weapons, micro-threaded charges under the skin. Nothing pinged. Treval stood at a curved window, sipping from a crystalline goblet. He was 7 feet tall, half transparent, with the smug posture of a creature who'd never had to fight to survive. "I assume you're here to discuss reparations?" Trival said without turning. "My species was coerced into supporting the Council. I trust Earth will be fair." Holt pulled the knife from under his sleeve and buried it in the base of the alien's spine. Trival gasped, jerking backward. The blade was designed for this. No sound, no splash, just pain and paralysis. Holt leaned in as the alien slumped to the floor. "You smiled while humans died on Helion, watched the footage at your feasts, paid mercenaries to break our supply lines, and called it strategy." Trival tried to speak, blood bubbling in his throat. "I'm not here to negotiate," Holt whispered. "I'm here to remember." And then he twisted the blade until the alien stopped moving. On his way out, he didn't run. He walked. No alarms went off. No guards drew weapons. No civilians screamed. By the time his boots hit the hangar deck of the Whisper, the video had already gone viral. They'd recorded the whole thing. A perfect, clean angle. No blur. No edit. Holt walking into a room with a monster. Holt walking out alone. The message was clear. No one was safe. Not anymore. Back on Earth, the civilian population didn't protest. There were no peace rallies, no campaigns begging for restraint. They had lost too much for too long. Fathers, sons, whole colonies. They wanted blood, and Holt gave it to them. Public support reached 97% approval. Crowdfunding sites popped up for covert missions. Civilians donated tech, weapons, even data. Some even volunteered for revenge squads. The politicians didn't stop it. They endorsed it. Earth was no longer part of the Galactic Council. It was something else now. Something leaner, meaner, and impossible to manipulate. The Council held an emergency session 3 weeks later. Only 17 species attended. The rest were either too scared to show up or were already dead. The speaker tried to hold order. A gelatinous thing with 20 eyes and a desperate voice. "We must initiate sanctions, blockades, if humanity is allowed to continue unchecked." A blast tore through the council chamber. Not from a missile, from inside. A human. No armor ever now. Just a former slave. One of the rescued humans the council used as workers and servants. He'd smuggled in a grav-shatter device inside his chest cavity, triggered it mid-session, took out the central delegation floor and vaporized 3 council warlords. The footage leaked within minutes. Captioned with one line. "We are not your pets. We are not your property. We are what you made us." And the galaxy began to break. Alliances cracked. The Trisari turned on the Corex, accusing them of withholding Earth strike data. The Dorlans left the Council altogether and opened trade with Earth, calling them the only honest killers in the stars. Dozens of minor species followed. The old order collapsed. And Earth? It didn't celebrate. It built. Factories doubled output. Drone fleets expanded. AI Black Ops divisions grew under Project Scarhound, a shadow initiative dedicated to one task. Find every name. Finish every list. In a bunker beneath Earth Command, Holt sat in silence, his left hand bandaged from a fresh wound, an extraction gone wrong. But his eyes were locked on the screen. The final page of the latest kill list glowed white. 5 names remained. 5 architects, the ones who had drawn up the blueprint for Earth's extermination 20 years ago. He cracked his neck, rolled his shoulder, and stood. "Let's finish this," he muttered. And the Blackthorn lifted from orbit once more. The 5 remaining names on the list weren't politicians. They weren't soldiers either. They were worse. They were the quiet ones, the masterminds, the think tank cowards who sat in sterile chambers with high-end liquor and detailed planetary kill counts, while someone else pulled the trigger. No glory, No battlefield scars, just spreadsheets of genocide. The intel Holt had recovered from the Velixar tunnels laid it all bare. It wasn't a spontaneous betrayal. It was a plan. A slow, methodical blueprint designed over 2 decades. 5 architects, 5 species. One goal? Contain humanity, if possible. Eradicate it, if necessary. And when Earth started to rise, they'd all chosen the second option. So Earth made its own decision. No court, no trial, only execution. The Blackthorn hovered in the dead zone between Drelvian space and the ash drift. No patrols, no comms traffic, just a black slice of cold where light refused to linger. Holt stood in the war chamber, his crew arrayed before him. Dre leaned against the tactical map, expression like steel. Rig, arms crossed, knuckles bruised from their last breach. Rear Admiral Grant, face unreadable, one hand resting near his belt. Always ready. No smiles, just purpose. "We've tracked the first," Dre said. "Codename, Architect 1, real name, Tholan Drev, exobiologist, head of the Human Gene Compliance Program, oversaw the respiratory breakdown virus trials, disappeared after Helion." "Found him?" Holt asked. She nodded once. "We didn't. He contacted us." That made Holt pause. "He's on a rogue science colony in the Orvan Sink. Claims he wants to defect. Says he has data, blueprints, files, names." "He wants protection?" Rig growled. "After what he did?" "No," Dre said. "He wants absolution." That was worse. Holt didn't reply right away. He simply turned and walked to the viewport. The stars out there didn't sparkle. They loomed, cold, watching. "He doesn't get absolution," Holt said finally. "He gets interrogation. Then he gets buried." "Agreed," Grant said. The plan was simple. Slip into Orvan Sink under blackout protocol. Find Drev, extract every last bite of what he knew. Then kill him. No broadcast, no public execution. Some people didn't deserve to be made famous. The Orvan Sink was a pit in the stars, an abandoned mining region full of dust storms, old asteroid hulls, and half-dead comms arrays. A perfect place to hide cowards. The UNS Vigilant, a drop frigate, broke from the Blackthorn and went silent 5 clicks out. Dre piloted, Holt and Rig suited up. They didn't take an army. This one was personal. The research station floated between 2 dead rocks, power flickering like it was begging for someone to shut it off. They docked on the lower port. Manual lock override. No lights, no welcoming party, just a stale airlock that groaned like an old man being asked to get out of bed for war. Inside, the stench was metallic. Not death, not decay, just neglect. Dre scanned ahead. Biosigns. 1, basement level, weak. They descended through flickering corridors, broken monitors, half-assembled drones. This wasn't a lab. It was a graveyard trying to remember science. And then they found him. Tholan Drev. Pale, skeletal, still wearing a lab coat like it meant something. His hair had thinned into wires, and his eyes had the wide, twitching look of a man who'd lived too long in his own mind. He was hooked up to a neural chair, half fused with it. Wires in his spine, tubes in his veins. The kind of setup you used when you wanted to preserve a brain after the body quit. "You came," he rasped. "No one else would," Holt said coldly. Drev laughed, a short, wet sound. "I expected a firing squad." "You'll get that, but first you'll talk." Drev nodded. "I will. I have nothing left to hide. It was never about hate, you know. It was fear." "You think that makes it better?" "No." Drev looked up, and for the first time, Holt saw it. Not remorse, not regret. Resignation. "You were evolving too fast, faster than the models predicted. Every time the Council pushed you down, you adapted. Smarter, angrier, harder." He coughed, blood speckling his chin. "So they told us to find a pressure valve. Something to keep you compliant. When that failed, they asked us to draw the kill tree. Holt's fists clenched. You were supposed to die in 3 generations, Drev continued. That was the plan. Phase out fertility, collapse food chains, make it look like mismanagement and bad policy. You'd vanish without war. But it didn't work, Dre muttered. No, Drev smiled bitterly. You adapted again, faster than the biodegrade vectors, so they switched strategies. Holt leaned in. Who's left? Drev blinked. You mean, which of the 5? Yes. He coughed hard. The neural chair buzzed. There's a vault, my data core. Biometrics locked. Take it. It'll give you everything. Names, locations, the next target, but promise me. He looked up, eyes suddenly wet. Make them pay. Holt stared at him for a long time, then nodded. I will. Drev slumped back, closed his eyes, and Holt shot him twice in the chest. Not out of rage, not out of vengeance, out of mercy. The man was already dead. He just didn't want to be anymore. They took the core, left the station burning, and by the time they returned to the Blackthorn, the next name glowed on screen. Architect 2. Vael Trai, financial overseer of the entire anti-human economic embargo, the one who funneled funds, blocked trade routes, and starved colonies with silent sanctions. She lived like a queen now, hidden on a floating palace station in neutral Talaris space, surrounded by guards, shimmering parties, layered defense systems. She wasn't hiding. She was taunting. Dre's voice was ice. She thinks you won't touch her. She thinks neutrality means safety, Grant added. Holt cracked his neck. She thinks wrong. They came at night cycle. 3 Earth strike pods slipped past orbital scans by piggybacking on merchant traffic. Human sympathizers, traitors to the Council, helped scramble defense codes. The palace was more theater than fortress, and Earth didn't come for theater. Rig led the entry team through the lower waste tunnels. They moved fast, quiet, no alerts, no chatter. By the time the guards figured out what was happening, it was over. Vael Tree was dragged out of her luxury chamber in silk robes, kicking and screaming. Holt stood over her on the landing pad, moonlight spilling over the Earth flag on his chest. You know who I am? She spat at him. You're filth. The animals we should have put down centuries ago. Then why are you the one in chains? He nodded once. Dre fired. No speech, no recording. Just one clean kill. The message was already known. There are no safe zones anymore. Not for those who plotted against Earth. 3 remain, and they're running. Each one has their own bunker, their own little army, their own hideouts, defenses, escape routes. It doesn't matter. Earth has declared war without end. Holt stared at the stars from the Blackthorn's deck, his voice low but unshaken. They thought they were killing a species. They didn't know they were building one. Dre stood beside him, arms folded. We've become what they feared. No, Holt said. We've become what they deserve. The Blackthorn drifted above the fractured moon of Halberian, one of the last neutral territories still operating under the illusion of diplomacy. Below, ash clouds curled over the jagged surface like the smoke from a funeral pyre. The remnants of a failed rebellion, funded by enemies who had already paid with their lives. Commander Holt stood over the flickering hologram of the next target. Architect 3. Varn Delza. Species, Corthan. Occupation, civilian mobilization strategist. Crimes, coordinated internal destabilization of Earth-loyal colonies through weaponized economics, famine algorithms, and proxy cults. Status, at large. Location, unconfirmed. Suspected asset, the Scorch Protocol. But it was the last line of the datasheet that made Holt's jaw clench. Currently being sheltered by human collaborators on Titan. That was new. Earth's enemies had always been alien. This was something else. Dre leaned over the console beside him, voice clipped. The SCI-FI confirms it. A faction calling itself the Titan Accord is sheltering Varn Delza in exchange for weapons, off-world transport rights, and anti-orbital shielding tech. Why would they side with him? Rig muttered, disgust heavy in his tone. He helped starve us, burned 6 colonies into the dirt. They think the Council's making a comeback, Grant said. They think if they kiss the right alien boots, they'll survive the fire. Holt didn't say anything at first. His face was stone. Cold. Then, what assets do we have on Titan? Dre pulled it up instantly. Minimal. We pulled back most of our forward ops after the Helion incident. 1 agent embedded, no fleet presence. Accord forces number about 1,200 strong. Lightly armed but dug in. Shield towers, surveillance arrays. Civilian zones are spread through the outskirts. Grant arched an eyebrow. They're hiding behind their own people. Rig cracked his knuckles. Doesn't matter. Holt nodded slowly. No speeches, no negotiations, no psychological operations. We treat them like the enemy they chose to become. He tapped the command line. Divert the Blackthorn. Titan just picked its side. The drop pod screamed into Titan's orange haze like fists from the heavens. 5 thunderclap impacts shook the ground across the main Accord base, scattering defenders, frying cameras, disabling their crude tracking systems. Holt's team came in behind them, tight, fast, ruthless. There was no resistance at first. The Titan Accord had expected threats, maybe embargoes, political pressure. They hadn't expected judgment. The UNS shock troops breached the first hangar like wolves let loose in a sheep pen. Every traitor with a weapon was gunned down. Those who dropped their rifles were zip-tied and branded for interrogation. No one got a pass. The Accord's leader, a former Earth Navy lieutenant named Creel, was captured trying to upload files off-world. Holt found him in the comms tower, fingers bleeding from trying to override the lockout on his data port. You knew who he was, Holt said quietly, pointing at the transmission log showing Varn Delza's last digital handshake. Creel didn't deny it. You think we wanted this? The man hissed. Earth's losing control. You're not fighting for survival anymore. You're turning into the very thing we were afraid of. Holt didn't flinch. Number. We're fighting for justice. You just didn't like that justice includes you now. He turned to Rig. Take him outside. Creel screamed all the way to the wall. The intel they ripped from Titan Accord files painted a clear path. Varn Delza had been moved days ago, exfiltrated to an old asteroid cluster known as the Husk Rings, near the Black Veil Expanse. No official colony records, just a string of abandoned mining outposts converted into intelligence black holes. Perfect place for a roach to hide. The Blackthorn rerouted again, deeper into the dead systems. Holt's fury didn't cool. It calcified. He manipulated humans, he growled. That's different. He's not just trying to kill us now. He's trying to divide us. He thinks if we start turning on each other, we'll forget about him, Dre muttered. He's gambling on us being soft with our own, Holt said. That ends now. The Husk Rings weren't pretty. Asteroids stitched together with docking cables and jury-rigged power systems. Rotating stations creaked like haunted ships in deep water. No communications, no response. Just dead quiet. The UNS Vigilant launched ahead under blackout. Holt, Dre, and Grant made entry on the outermost ring with a zero-grav glide team. Rig took the underside flanks. His domain was breach and clear. They moved through old corridors built for miners long dead. Lights flickered. Gravity sputtered. Something about the place reeked of betrayal. Then they found it. Central chamber. Reinforced. The kind of place designed to survive a starquake. Inside, holograms flickered. Maps of Earth, troop deployments, news feeds from Titan, and in the center sat Varn Delza. He wasn't armored. He wasn't panicked. He was waiting. "You're efficient," the alien said calmly, his long fingers tapping the edge of his chair. "I told the Accord you'd come." Holt raised his rifle. "I don't need a speech." "Then I'll give you something better," Delza said. "A choice." That made Dre tense. "He's stalling." "Of course I am," Delza smiled. "I've already triggered 3 dead man protocols, 1 on the edge of your solar system, 1 inside the last loyal human satellite ring, and 1... He tapped his own chest. "Right here." A biometric trigger, synced to his heartbeat. Holt didn't blink. "You bluff like someone who doesn't understand what we've become." Delza tilted his head. "Oh, I understand. You're the monster now. The thing that never blinks. The thing that doesn't stop." "You helped starve our children," Holt said coldly. "You helped convince humans to betray their own." "And yet you still hesitate to shoot," Delza whispered. A pause. Then Holt turned to Dre. "Heart rate monitor." She activated her pulse disruptor and aimed it squarely at Delza's chest. The weapon fired with a soft thump, a needle-thin bolt that froze his heart instantly. He gasped once, stiffened, then slumped forward, eyes wide. No explosion, no dead man code, just a corpse. Dre smiled. Guess he overestimated himself. "Like they all did," Holt said. "They didn't upload the footage. Didn't need to. This wasn't for the galaxy. It was for Earth." Back on the Blackthorn, Holt reviewed the aftermath reports. The Titan Accord was dismantled. Collaborators rounded up. The faction's assets seized. Delza's data core was decrypted, full of strategic sabotage plans and experimental psychological warfare blueprints designed to destabilize human unity. Everything had been a long play, a slow knife, and Earth had just snapped the blade. 3 architects down, 2 left. But the real change was something else. Humans had finally turned on humans, and they'd paid for it in blood. Holt stood alone in the command deck, looking out at the stars that had once seemed endless. Now they looked smaller, meaner, not because they had changed, because Earth had outgrown fear. Dre approached, her voice low. "We're not the same species we were when this started." "We never were," Holt replied. "They just woke up the wrong version." Rigg stepped in from the lift, blood still on his gloves. "We ready for the next?" Holt didn't answer immediately. He stared at the final 2 names glowing on his screen. One was hidden in the deepest council vaults. The other was already inside Earth's orbit. The last war hadn't started in orbit. It started in a boardroom, under golden lights and champagne toasts, on Earth's most protected continent, surrounded by men who'd never worn armor but held the fate of billions in their polished hands. And one of them wasn't loyal. Holt stood in Earth Command's central chamber, staring at the last decrypted logs from Architect 4's data core. The text scrolled past in brutal simplicity. Coordinates, encrypted messages, falsified fleet manifests. But it was the last line that cracked something inside him. Asset D9, embedded on Earth. Human. Status? Operational. Rigg leaned over the console, arms stiff. This can't be right." "It is," Holt said flatly. Dre crossed the room, datapad in hand, her jaw clenched. "The Council wasn't betting on our extinction by force anymore. They switched tactics years ago. They banked on erosion, one traitor at the center, guiding policy, blocking retaliation, rerouting supply chains, softening our backbone." "Asset D9, Grant muttered, stepping into the room, "is Director Damon Rorn." Holt didn't blink. Of course it is. Rorn was a name carved into the foundation of Earth's survival, head of strategic allocation, hero of the Great Collapse, orchestrator of post-war recovery, and trusted advisor to every fleet admiral in orbit. But Rorn had never fired a shot, never stood in a trench, never even left the safety of the Blue Zone's triple-layered luxury towers. And somehow, that made him perfect for betrayal. Rigg slammed his fist on the metal railing. He sat in on every deployment meeting, every retaliation operation. He signed off on the orbital strikes. Dre's voice was tight. And he delayed 90% of them. Remember the Holeth blockade delay? That was his override. It cost us 2 battalions. Delays, Holt murmured. Reallocations, soft sabotage, always wrapped in red tape and civilian concerns. He turned towards the team, fire behind his eyes. He didn't need to fire a shot. He just made sure the gun was never loaded. They didn't move publicly. Not for this. This wasn't an orbital strike or a drone blitz. This was a cutting out, a surgical internal war. If Earth found out what Rorn was, the fallout could fracture what unity remained. Millions looked up to him, trusted him. Holt would deal with the truth. But first, he had to deliver the bullet. The UNS Blackthorn returned to Earth orbit silently, unannounced. Holt changed into civilian gear, ditching armor for something less obvious. Dre and Rigg followed in plain clothes. Grant remained aboard the ship, ready to launch full orbital lockdown if Holt's mission failed. They took a dropship under the call sign of a logistics review team. Security at the Blue Zone barely blinked. Of course they didn't. The Blackthorn had high-level clearance, and no one questioned Rorn's authority. That was about to change. The Blue Zone was quiet. White stone, trimmed trees, polished steel. No sirens, no hunger, no war. Rorn's office sat at the top of Tower 7, a glass cathedral built on lies. Holt had walked these halls before, once believing he was looking at the minds saving humanity. Now, all he saw were cowards hiding behind numbers. They entered through the lift bay. Dre disabled the cams. Rigg stood watch outside the executive suite. Holt stepped in alone. Rorn sat behind his desk, a holographic display flickering with logistics numbers and population flow charts. He didn't look up. "Commander Holt," he said, "back from the frontier so soon?" His tone was polite, warm even. Holt didn't answer. Rorn finally raised his eyes, and that's when the smile cracked. "You know," Holt stepped closer, silent, deadly. "I don't know everything," he said coldly. "Not yet, but I know enough." Rorn leaned back, the tension tightening his face for just a moment before he smoothed it away. "You're wrong, Commander. You've been lied to." "No," Holt said. "You lied. While we bled out in the dirt, you sold pieces of us to the ones holding the knife." Rorn sighed. "You think war is only fought with guns, but it's more complicated than that. It's negotiations, influence, power, control. I made sure Earth survived." "You made sure Earth suffered," Holt growled. "While the Council erased our colonies, you were busy reallocating defenses to neutral zones that didn't exist." "I gave us time," Rorn said quietly. "If the Council thought we were manageable, if they thought we could be domesticated, they'd stop trying to annihilate us." "They should have finished the job," Holt snapped, "because now there's no leash that'll hold us, and you're the last hand feeding the enemy." He raised the weapon, a compact slug pistol. Not plasma, not explosive. Clean. Quiet. Rorn's eyes didn't flinch. "You'll make me a martyr." "You're not important enough," Holt said. "You're a cancer we cut out." He fired once. Rorn slumped over his desk. No alarms, no broadcast. Dre stepped in seconds later. "Office scrubbed, logs cleared, no trace." "Wasn't doing this for secrecy," Holt said. "I did it for us." 2 days later, the official report read, Director Damon Rorn died in his sleep of a cardiovascular event. A replacement was named, one who knew which side of history mattered now. But in dark forums and off-grid comms, rumors spread like wildfire. They said Holt killed him. They said Rorn was a traitor. They said Earth was now clean. The people didn't riot. They celebrated. Now, only one name remained. Architect 5, species, unknown, codename, the Warden. Last confirmed location, a council deep vault in the outer brink. Coordinates decrypted from Delza's core led to a black site world not even marked on official maps, just a cluster of debris around a neutron star, sealed under ancient encryption. It was where the council kept their worst secrets, and Holt was coming. No more traitors, no more hesitation, just vengeance, sharpened into the shape of a final bullet. On the Blackthorn's deck, Holt stood in silence as the ship approached the outer brink. Dre moved beside him, calm as ever. "Ready for the last ride?" "No," Holt said, "but we're going anyway." Rigg stepped into the war room, blood already on his sleeve. "Just got word. 5 Earth ships intercepted a Council recon team trying to reach the vault first." "They know we're coming," Dre muttered. "Let them," Holt said. "We're not asking permission." The coordinates led them into a graveyard. The outer brink wasn't on any map. It wasn't a planet or even a system. It was a memory, forgotten by design. A neutron star pulsing like the slow heartbeat of a dying god. And around it, fragments of failed wars and dead worlds drifted like a metallic fog. Burnt hulls, cracked rings, bones frozen in black vacuum. No patrols, no broadcasts, no warnings, just the deep, deaf silence of something waiting to be uncovered. The UNS Blackthorn held position outside the debris ring. Holt stood on the command deck, helmet clipped to his belt, voice grim. "This is it," he said quietly. "The vault's inside that debris field. Council designation MUR-9. Grant's voice came through the overhead. "We've confirmed a single signal source. Low power, deep subsurface. Coded layers suggest a planetary core base, buried to survive direct impact or stellar collapse." Dre added, "We've also confirmed life signs, just one. Same location." Rigg grunted. "It's him, the Warden. The last architect, the mind behind the virus codes, the original theory crafter of humanity's containment, the one who started it all and disappeared before the first shot was fired. No species identifier, no image, just a code name passed through intercepted council messages like a ghost. And now he wasn't hiding anymore. He was waiting. Holt suited up slowly, locking each magnetic plate into place, fingerless gloves tightening over scarred hands. He'd fought in dirt trenches and on orbital decks, but this wasn't just another mission. This was the ending he'd promised the dead. And Earth didn't do mercy. The shuttle pierced the debris field like a dagger through rust. Shards of ancient hulls screeched against the shielding. Automated warnings buzzed, but no intercepts came. The Black Vault didn't protect itself with weapons. It didn't need to. The idea was simple. Hide where no sane species would go. But humanity had long since abandoned sanity. They landed on a dead rock orbiting the neutron star, the only one with a faint energy signature. Subsurface scans confirmed the vault's presence, buried 10 miles deep, locked in radiation-proof alloy and coated in stealth materials. Holt led the descent team himself. Dre at his side, Rigg at point, 6 Marines behind, weapons tight, visors dark, no lights, no communications, just gravity boots and tension. They breached the outer shell using a compressed rail cutter. What followed was a descent into hell. Corridors twisted like veins through the rock. The walls pulsed with old shielding tech, powered by a still-beating core. No signs of life, no traps, no resistance. And then, a door, a vault door. 10 meters tall, no handles, just a blank face of alloy. But the moment Holt stepped forward, it opened. By invitation. The chamber beyond was sterile, circular, white, and at its center sat a single figure, tall, thin, humanoid, but wrapped in a skin-tight interface suit that shimmered with data pulses. Not alien, not quite human. Something in between. No guards, no defenses, just a chair and a voice. I was wondering how long it would take you. Holt didn't raise his weapon. Not yet. He stepped forward, eyes cold. You're the warden. The figure nodded slowly. That's what they called me, but I was never a jailer. I was the architect of containment, not punishment, prevention. Dre moved in behind Holt, weapon trained. Prevention of what? The warden looked up, and for the first time, they saw his face. Human, older than any of them, skin creased from artificial gravity and age manipulation, eyes sharp but empty. You. Riggs' voice was ice. He's one of us? No, the warden replied calmly. I was before you. Gen 1 colonist. Pre-expansion. I saw what humanity became after we broke into the stars. The wars, the scorched planets. I saw the pattern. He stood, slow and deliberate. You don't conquer planets. You consume them. Faster than any species. More violently than the warflesh of the Karex. I watched Earth evolve into something unstoppable. I did the math, the simulations, the psychological mapping. He stepped closer, almost reverently. You were never going to integrate with the galaxy. You were going to devour it. So you tried to kill us, Holt said flatly. I tried to protect the future. You turned your back on your own kind, Rigg growled. While kids starved on Mars colonies because you cut supply chains. The warden didn't flinch. Because I knew what was coming. You won. That's the proof. You became everything I feared. You didn't unify. You retaliated. You erased. Holt stared at him, then drew his weapon. You're right about one thing, he said. We don't unify with monsters. We end them. But the warden didn't reach for a weapon. He simply pointed to the chamber wall, where a new panel began to glow. You can kill me, he said, but that panel controls the Echo Protocol, a failsafe, a signal coded to erase humanity's genetic signature from every known archival record in the galaxy. Not just death, erasure, future. I won't remember you. Biomapping will ignore you. You'll be gone. Dre's voice cracked the silence. You'd kill your entire species for that? The warden's voice didn't rise. I'd end a virus before it spread. Holt said nothing. He walked past the warden, stood before the console. Lines of code flickered. A single button blinked. Activate. And next to it, another. Purge. No passcodes. Just a choice. You came all this way, the warden said, voice tinged with pride. To prove me wrong. Now prove it. Riggs stepped forward, weapon ready. We end this now. Holt raised his hand and pressed purge. The entire vault shuddered. The Echo Protocol disintegrated, every bit of data burning away in a visual storm of dying code. Red pulses flashed. Backups detonated in the walls. Even the warden looked stunned. You're not keeping it? No, Holt said coldly. We don't erase our enemies. We bury them. Then he turned, raised his pistol, and fired. The warden collapsed with a single shot. No glory, no last words, just judgment. The Blackthorn destroyed the vault from orbit. No broadcasts, no speeches, no claims, just a flash and silence. The war was over, but Earth didn't celebrate. It prepared, because even if the architects were dead, the galaxy still watched, still wondered, still feared, and Earth liked it that way. Back on Earth, Holt stood alone atop a ruined spire overlooking the city edge. The stars above looked smaller now, not because they had changed, but because humanity had risen to meet them. Dre stood beside him. They'll come again? Yes, Holt said. But next time they won't come for peace. They'll come to beg. And what will we give them? He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just turned and walked back into the dark, leaving only one truth behind. Humanity had survived the trap. Now it owned the cage. The aliens stood tall, their eyes gleaming with condescension as they watched the lone human step forward. Their laughter, an eerie mixture of guttural growls and high-pitched chittering, echoed across the grand chamber. "You bring a human to speak on your behalf?" One of the Eldari warlords scoffed, his golden exoskeleton glinting under the artificial lights. "This is an insult to the Dominion. Humans are barely more than animals." The Galactic Dominion had ruled for thousands of years, crushing civilizations that dared to resist, absorbing cultures only to erase them, rewriting history until nothing remained of those they conquered. And now humanity was next. Earth had barely begun to reach beyond its solar system when the Dominion arrived, demanding surrender or annihilation. The other council members, beings from 100 different species, watched with amusement. They had seen this before: defiance, arrogance, and then complete subjugation. The Eldari, the ruling race of the Dominion, took pleasure in breaking species that thought they could stand against them. The human ambassador, Dr. Elias Carter, stood alone. No weapons, no armor, no army, just a simple man in a worn-out suit. His presence was a joke to them, a final act of desperation from an already defeated species. Carter cleared his throat. His hands didn't shake. His voice was calm. "I will speak," he said, his words precise, "but not in your tongue." More laughter. Some of the Eldari banged their fists against the stone tables, a mocking display of their superiority. "And what language will you use, ape?" Warlord Zelvaran sneered. "Your own? A primitive dialect from an insignificant rock?" Carter's lips curled into a small smile. "Number I will speak in yours, but not the one you know." The laughter faded, confusion settling in the room. And then he spoke. The moment the first syllable left his mouth, the chamber fell silent. The air grew heavy, as if the very walls could feel the weight of the words. The Eldari warlords, once so smug and composed, recoiled as if struck. Their eyes widened, mandibles clicking in shock. Carter continued, his voice echoing like a ghost from another time. The sounds were harsh, guttural, yet fluid, carrying the weight of something ancient, something lost. The Eldari trembled. One of them dropped to a knee, his exoskeleton trembling violently. Another clutched his head, as if trying to block out the sound. Zelvoran stumbled back, his golden eyes burning with something that had not been seen in the Dominion for thousands of years. Fear. "Stop," he choked out. "Where did you learn this?" Carter did not stop. The words poured out of him like a river breaking free from a dam. The language was dead, wiped from history by the Eldari themselves. It was the tongue of their ancestors, the language of the first Eldari Empire, long before the Dominion. A language they had buried because it spoke of things they feared, of power they had forsaken, of a time when they were not gods, but mortals, fragile and fallible. "It is impossible," another Eldari rasped. "No outsider can know this." Carter took a step forward. The warlords flinched. "Your people tried to erase this language from existence," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the forgotten past. "But you failed, because history has a way of surviving, in the most unexpected places." The council chamber, once filled with arrogance and laughter, was now a tomb of silence. The Dominion was built on the belief that they were untouchable, that they had conquered all that was before them. But now, standing before them, was a simple human who spoke the language of their ancestors, a language they themselves no longer understood. Carter let the last word hang in the air. The warlords did not speak. They could not. They only stared at him, at this human who had become the voice of something ancient, something powerful, something they thought was lost forever. Then, softly, Carter spoke again, this time in their modern tongue. Kneel. And for the first time in thousands of years, the Eldari did. The silence in the chamber stretched on, thick and suffocating. The warlords of the Eldari, once the undisputed rulers of the Dominion, stood frozen, caught between the weight of their ancestors' lost tongue and the impossible truth that a mere human had spoken it. Dr. Elias Carter let them simmer in their confusion. He had studied them for years, not just their technology, not just their empire, but their very foundation. He had read the forbidden texts, dug into the ruins they thought were hidden from the rest of the galaxy. And in those ruins, he had found their greatest shame. Zelvaran was the first to break the silence. His golden exoskeleton quivered with something his kind had long forgotten: uncertainty. "Where did you learn this?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Carter tilted his head. "The question you should be asking is, why did you forget it?" Another murmur ran through the council. The Eldari were an old race, older than most species in the Dominion. They prided themselves on their long and unbroken history. But it wasn't unbroken, was it? They had erased something they had been too afraid to remember. "No one speaks the old tongue," one of the other warlords rasped, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Not even us. It was purged, locked away, forbidden." Carter took another step forward, and this time, no one moved to stop him. "And yet here I am," he said, "speaking it." The power dynamic in the room had shifted. The laughter, the mockery, the sheer arrogance that had filled the chamber moments ago had evaporated. The mighty Eldari, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, looked at him with something that went beyond fear. It was recognition. Carter pressed his advantage. "You see, the thing about history is that it doesn't stay buried forever," he continued, pacing slowly. "You can erase records, burn books, rewrite laws, but you can't erase memory. The truth has a way of surviving, whether you want it to or not." Zelvaran's fists clenched. "You are a fool if you think mere words will undo the Dominion." Carter smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "Words have undone greater empires than yours." The Eldari warlord moved to speak again, but Carter cut him off. This time he spoke louder, his voice ringing with authority. He didn't just recite the old tongue, he commanded it. And the chamber shook. The towering stone pillars trembled. The air itself seemed to ripple, charged with something unseen but deeply felt. The alien council members recoiled, eyes wide in disbelief. The Dominion's rulers had buried the old tongue for a reason. It wasn't just a language. It was power. It carried the weight of something ancient, something real. Zelvaran stumbled back, gripping the edges of his throne. His once perfect control had cracked, revealing the raw, primal fear beneath. "Impossible," he whispered. "It was lost. It was dead." Carter took one final step, now standing before the warlords like an executioner before the condemned. "And yet here it is," he said softly. "Here I am." The Eldari were proud, ruthless, and unforgiving. But they were not stupid. They understood what was happening. The moment their own kind saw this, saw a human wielding what they had long abandoned, their rule would fracture. The Dominion would never be the same. Carter folded his hands behind his back. "So now, we negotiate." Zelvaran's mandibles clicked, his breath coming sharp and fast. "And if we refuse?" Carter simply smiled. "Then I keep talking." The warlords, who had once laughed at humanity, now sat in fearful silence. The Dominion had believed themselves untouchable. But they had forgotten something buried in their own past. Words were power. And humans had just learned to speak the deadliest one of all. The silence in the chamber stretched, thick with the weight of history resurfacing. The mighty warlords of the Eldery Dominion, once gods among lesser beings, now looked like frightened children facing the shadows of their ancestors. Dr. Elias Carter stood in the center of it all, calm, unwavering. He could feel the tension in the air, the realization creeping into the warlords' minds like a slow poison. They had spent centuries erasing this language, silencing its echoes, and now here was a human, one of the very species they had mocked, resurrecting it. Zelvaran's breathing had grown uneven, his golden exoskeleton reflecting the dim light like a relic of a forgotten age. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hollow. "What do you want?" Carter let the words hang for a moment. He had expected the resistance to last longer, but fear was a powerful tool, one the Eldari had used for millennia. Now it was being used against them. "Humanity's sovereignty," Carter said, his voice even. "Earth and all its colonies will remain independent. No dominion rule, no forced integration, no tribute." The warlords stirred, some bristling, others hesitating. One of them, a towering Eldari with obsidian plating, let out a dry, humorless hiss. "You ask too much." Carter smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Do I?" He took a slow step forward, and the warlords unconsciously leaned back. "Because from where I stand, I think I'm being generous." Zelvaran's mandibles twitched, his mind working through the impossible situation. "You think, because you speak an old language, that you have power over us?" Carter tilted his head. "Number, I know I do." He let his next words slip from his tongue in the old tongue once more, rolling them like thunder across the chamber. The effect was immediate. The walls trembled again, as if the very structure of the Dominion itself resented the language being spoken aloud. But it wasn't the walls Carter was watching. It was the warlords. Their bodies twitched, their minds battling instincts they didn't even understand. Their pupils dilated, their breathing hitched, and their hands clenched at nothing. Because they remembered. Not consciously. No, that knowledge had been buried too deep, too long ago, but something within them, the blood of their ancestors, the echoes of an empire older than even the Dominion, recognized the words. This was the language of their creators. The Eldari had ruled for thousands of years, but they had not always ruled. There was a time before their empire, before their dominion over the galaxy. They had been slaves once, servants to beings who spoke this tongue. And those beings had vanished. The Eldari had destroyed all traces of them, purging history, rewriting their own origins to hide the truth. That once, long ago, they had been beneath someone else. And now, here was a human, speaking the words of their long-forgotten masters. Carter watched the realization settle in, saw the fear crystallize into something colder. "You remember, don't you?" he said, his voice softer now, almost pitying. "Even if you don't know why." Zelvaran swallowed, something Carter had never seen an Eldari do before. "You cannot use what you do not understand." Carter only smiled. "Can't I?" He took another step, and the Eldari didn't move. "You fear this language because you buried it, but we have dug it up. We know things now, things you tried to erase." He let that sink in before delivering the final blow. "And if humanity knows, how long before the rest of the galaxy does, too?" The warlords stiffened. The Dominion was built on an unshakable foundation, on the belief that the Eldari were the highest, the most powerful, the eternal rulers of the stars. But if the truth came out, if their subjects learned that the Eldari had once bowed to another, the Dominion would not survive it. Zelvaran's breath was ragged now, his mind torn between pride and survival. The other warlords were silent, their gazes darting between Carter and their leader, waiting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zelvaran exhaled. And then he bowed his head. The Dominion recognizes the sovereignty of humanity. Carter nodded, satisfied. Good choice. The warlords of the Eldari Dominion, once so mighty, so untouchable, sat in silence as a human turned and walked away, leaving them with the weight of a history they could no longer escape. And across the stars, a shift began. For the first time in thousands of years, the Dominion had knelt. And it would not be the last. The Dominion's concession had shaken the galaxy, but Carter knew better than to believe the war was over. Fear had forced the Eldari to bow, but fear was a temporary leash. The moment they found a way to cut it, they would come for humanity with a vengeance. That meant humanity had little time. Back on Earth, the leaders of the newly secured Human Federation were celebrating their victory, praising Carter as the man who had done the impossible. But Carter didn't stay for the parades, the interviews, or the political maneuvering. Instead, he boarded a ship bound for the edges of known space. Because while Earth celebrated, he had one burning question that refused to leave his mind. What were the Eldari so desperate to erase? The Peregrine was a small, unremarkable ship, perfect for slipping past Dominion patrols. On board, Carter had assembled a team, not politicians, not generals, but scholars, historians, and archaeologists, the best minds humanity had to offer. Their destination, a dead world, one that didn't appear on any Dominion star charts, a world Carter had only learned about by deciphering forbidden texts, tracking inconsistencies in ancient records, and finding echoes of something older than the Dominion itself, a world called Vorthal-Ka. The planet was a wasteland. As the Peregrine descended through the storm-choked atmosphere, Carter could already tell that whatever had happened here, it had been deliberate. Massive glassed craters stretched across the land, entire cities reduced to nothing but skeletal remains of towers half swallowed by time. This wasn't just an abandoned world. It was a purged one. Something doesn't add up, Vasquez murmured beside him as they stepped onto the cracked surface. The rest of the team fanned out, scanning ruins, gathering data. Carter knelt, running his fingers over a broken slab of stone. The inscriptions were barely legible, but he recognized the script immediately. The old tongue. The Dominion had erased this place from history, wiped it from maps, buried it under layers of propaganda. And now he knew why, because this had been their beginning. Not as rulers, as slaves. Hours later, deep within the ruins, Carter and his team found what they had been looking for. A massive chamber, sealed beneath the earth. Carvings covered the walls, depicting creatures that bore a vague resemblance to the Eldari, but taller, more imposing. Their features were crueler, their posture rigid, exuding authority. The Eldari hadn't always been the ones in charge. They had served something else, something that had disappeared. Carter swallowed hard. He traced a carving with his fingers, feeling the rough edges of the stone. The story it told was unmistakable. The Eldari had rebelled. They had overthrown their masters, and then they had wiped them out. Every record, every trace, every whisper of the beings that had once ruled them. Vasquez stepped beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think they're still out there?" Carter exhaled slowly. "If they were powerful enough to rule the Eldari, we better hope they're not." But deep in his gut, he had a sinking feeling. Something that had once ruled a species as ruthless as the Eldari would not have simply vanished. And if they were still out there, then humanity had just done something very, very dangerous. They had spoken their language, and something, somewhere, might have heard. The weight of the discovery pressed down on Carter like a vice. The Eldari had not been the first rulers of the stars. They had been subjects, servants to something older, something powerful enough to command them before they had risen in rebellion and erased all traces of their former masters. And now, humanity had spoken that forbidden tongue. If the Eldari had feared it, if they had erased history so thoroughly to hide the truth, then what were they really afraid of? That someone would uncover the past? Or that the past would hear them? Carter exhaled, his breath fogging in the damp underground chamber. His fingers ran over the ancient inscriptions one more time, tracing the outlines of the towering figures carved into the stone. The worn edges of their faces still radiated something cold, something watchful. Vasquez stood beside him, her posture rigid. "We should leave." Carter turned his head slightly. Scared? Her jaw tightened. Cautious. She wasn't wrong. The Peregrine was alone out here, deep in uncharted space. If anything happened, no one was coming to save them. Carter was about to respond when one of the archaeologists called out from deeper within the ruins. "Dr. Carter, you need to see this." He exchanged a glance with Vasquez before following the voice. They moved through the darkened corridors of the chamber, flashlights cutting through dust and time. The deeper they went, the stronger the air seemed to press against them, thick with the weight of something waiting. At the far end of the chamber, a massive stone door stood ajar, dust swirling in the air beyond it. The archaeologist, a young woman named Malik, was standing at its entrance, her face pale. "It's not just a tomb," she whispered. "It's a warning." Carter stepped inside, and the moment he saw what was waiting, his breath caught in his throat. The walls here were not carved with images of rulers or battles. They were filled with something else. Writing. Hundreds of lines, all in the same forbidden language. And unlike the rest of the ruins, these words were not worn by time. They were pristine, untouched, as if the universe itself refused to let them fade. Carter stepped closer, reading aloud the first inscription. "They will return." Vasquez stiffened. "That's not good." Carter continued. "They watch the stars. They wait for the tongue to be spoken again." A chill ran down his spine. The Eldari hadn't just erased their masters out of shame. They had erased them out of fear, because whatever had ruled them before had not been destroyed. Only sleeping. Vasquez took an uneasy step back. "We need to get off this planet, now." Carter's heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain calm. He looked at the last inscription, the one at the center of the wall, written in larger script than all the others. He read it aloud. "The first kings of the stars will rise again." A deep, distant rumble vibrated through the chamber. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Somewhere far beneath them, something groaned. Something woke up. Carter turned to Vasquez, his voice tight. "Run!" The deep rumble beneath the ruins grew into a low, vibrating thrum that Carter could feel in his bones. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and the once-dead chamber felt suddenly alive. Malik was already backing away, her eyes wide with terror. "That wasn't a tremor, was it?" "No," Carter muttered, pulse hammering. "Something's moving." Vasquez grabbed his arm. "We need to go, now." But Carter's eyes were still locked on the ancient inscriptions. The words had burned themselves into his mind. "The first kings of the stars will rise again." The Dominion had wiped them from history, erased every trace of their rule. But now Carter knew the truth. The first kings had never been defeated. The Eldari hadn't won. They had only survived. The thrum beneath their feet grew louder, deeper, like an impossibly large engine roaring to life. The entire ruin shifted, and from deep within the stone walls, a noise echoed through the corridors. Something between a mechanical hum and a deep, resonant heartbeat. Something was waking up. "Move!" Vasquez shouted, grabbing Carter's shoulder and yanking him toward the exit. The team bolted through the tunnels, their boots slamming against stone floors, their flashlights casting frantic shadows. The air felt charged, as if electricity was dancing through the ruins, stirring the dust of a long, dead civilization back into motion. And then, a sound. Not the rumble beneath their feet, not the collapsing stone, a voice, a deep, resonant whisper, so low it seemed to crawl inside their skulls rather than pass through their ears. "Who speaks our tongue?" Carter nearly stumbled. His breath caught in his throat. The others didn't seem to hear it, not the same way he did. But something in the chamber had heard him speak. And now it was speaking back. "Fleshborn, carbon-made, you are not our kin." It wasn't just sound, it was understanding. The words didn't come from the walls, or from an entity standing before him. They came from everywhere, from the ruins themselves, from something buried deep. The moment they reached the outer chamber, Malik gasped. "Oh my God!" Carter turned, his heart slamming against his ribs. The ancient carvings, once faded, broken, nearly erased, were glowing. Lines of energy, dull gold in color, flickered across the walls. The inscriptions in the old tongue shifted, rearranging themselves as if responding to his presence. The voice came again, this time louder. "You have spoken the words of the forgotten. The silence is broken." Carter could barely breathe. The chamber itself seemed to hum, the walls pulsing like the veins of something colossal, something awakening. "You are not the Eldari. You are new, small. You do not belong." The others were shouting now, trying to pull Carter toward the exit, but he was frozen, unable to look away from the shifting inscriptions. Then, the final words came, low and cold, crawling into his skull like fingers made of shadow. "We are coming." The ruins exploded into chaos. Stone cracked, walls split open. From beneath the surface, enormous black structures, machines unlike anything humanity had ever seen, began rising. And Carter realized with absolute horror that they hadn't just discovered a lost civilization. They had triggered its return. Vasquez grabbed him by the collar and dragged him toward the ship. "Carter, move!" He stumbled forward, his mind racing. The First Kings weren't a myth. They weren't extinct. They had been asleep. And humanity had just woken them up. The Peregrine's engines roared to life as Carter and his team sprinted aboard, breathless, hearts pounding. The ground beneath them trembled, not with aftershocks, but with the pulse of something vast, something waking. "Get us out of here!" Vasquez shouted to the pilot. Through the viewport, the ruins of Vorthal-Ka were changing. The ancient stone gave way to rising structures, black monoliths twisting into the sky like skeletal fingers clawing their way out of a grave. Energy crackled along their surfaces, dull gold lines illuminating the world in a dead light. As the Peregrine lifted off, Carter saw it, the first shape emerging from the depths. It was impossible to grasp its true form, its edges blurred by something his mind couldn't fully comprehend. But its eyes, twin pools of glowing darkness, locked onto him. And then the voice returned. "Your kind has spoken. Your kind has heard. Now, your kind will kneel." The Peregrine shot into the sky, leaving the planet behind. But Carter knew distance wouldn't save them. The First Kings were awake, and they were coming.